the winter of 2018, a small Himalayan town named Rudravana became infamous overnight. 7 people, each from different neighborhoods, professions and backgrounds, vanished over the course of 6 nights. Every disappearance occurred between midnight and 3:00 a.m. The weather was clear, the town quiet, and not a single scream was heard. No signs of forced entry, no DNA, no ransom demands, just locked doors, undisturbed rooms, and sometimes eerily half-finished cups of coffee or radios still playing old blues tunes. The final victim, a retired investigative journalist named Henry Caldwell, left behind one last note on a crumpled piece of paper in his fireplace, half burned, but still legible. "I've seen the pattern. I know who's next. It's not random, it's a purge." Then silence, until 5 years later in 2023, a woman named Emily Dawson reappeared. She was barefoot and blindfolded on the same road she'd disappeared from, muttering a single phrase again and again. "We were never missing. We were taken." Now, an unlikely team, Jack Remy, a disgraced former detective with a haunted past, Nate Collins, a conspiracy podcaster obsessed with the case, Sarah Whitaker, a grieving mother who lost her daughter on night 2, Emily Dawson, the only known survivor, and Benji Moore, a 10-year-old boy who claims to dream in other people's memories, are about to uncover a truth so horrific, so long buried, that someone has for decades to keep it hidden, and someone is still watching. Welcome to Storiosity's videos. It was the March 3rd, 2023, 4:12 am. Deputy Alan Miles had just poured himself a second cup of gas station coffee when the radio crackled to life. "Dispatch to Unit 6. We've got a code 13, female, mid-20s, barefoot, non-verbal. Sighted wandering Route 7 near Deerbridge." He paused, the styrofoam cup halfway to his lips. "Copy that, dispatch, en route." Route 7 was barely travelled at night. The last reported accident had been a moose collision 6 months ago. That area was mostly just empty road and whispering pine trees. Alan flipped on the siren and sped off, dust kicking behind the cruiser in the misty darkness. 10 minutes later, headlights caught the figure in the road. She was walking in slow, uneven steps, bare feet scraping against gravel. A long tear ran down the side of her dress, and her knees were caked with dried blood and mud. Her blindfold was stained and frayed. She didn't flinch at the bright beam. Alan stopped 20 feet away, stepping out cautiously, hand on his holster. "Ma'am," he called, voice steady. She turned her head slightly. Her face was pale, gaunt, and her lips trembled, as if trying to form words. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Then finally she spoke, barely a whisper. "We were never missing. We were taken." By sunrise, Crescent Hollow was awake. The return of Emily Dawson spread like wildfire through the sleepy mountain town. 5 years ago she'd vanished during her evening run, left her phone, keys and AirPods on the front porch like she'd stepped out for just a moment. Her parents, Dale and Martha Dawson, had plastered her face on every pole, cafe board and local news channel. But after months, then years, they had stopped hoping. She was 24 when she disappeared. She was supposed to be dead. Now she sat in a hospital bed at Agnes Medical, IV in her arm, refusing to speak more than a few words at a time. The psychiatrist assigned to her case said she was suffering from trauma-induced selective mutism and non-specific dissociative memory. Translation, she was a mess, but something else was wrong. Her body showed signs of recent trauma. She had bruises that were no older than a week. She had burn marks in the shape of old restraints. Her hair had been cut jaggedly short recently. Someone had held her somewhere, not for 5 years, but for days, maybe weeks, and then let her go. or she escaped. Jack Remy had not set foot in Crescent Hollow since he turned in his badge in 2020. After the disappearance of Henry Caldwell, the last victim of the so-called Hollow 7, he had refused to stop digging, even after the department told him the cases were unrelated, even after they threatened disciplinary action. When he leaked his findings to a local blog and got caught, it sealed his fate. He drank a lot now, too much. But that morning, as he sat in a dusty Seattle motel and read the breaking news, he sobered instantly. Survivor of Hollow disappearances returns after 5 years. His hands shook as he scrolled through the blurry photo of Emily Dawson being helped out of the woods by 2 EMTs. Emily's alive. Jack dropped his cigarette, grabbed his coat and made a decision. For years he had believed the disappearances were linked part of a pattern. Now he had a second chance. The key witness, the missing puzzle piece, had come back, and he'd be damned if he let this get buried again. That same morning, Nate Collins was sitting in his garage studio, recording the latest episode of his conspiracy podcast, The Smoke Signal. He had just finished a 3-part series on unsolved town vanishings. Crescent Hollow had been his most downloaded case, mostly because of his crackpot theory that the disappearances were part of a failed government mind control experiment. He didn't expect a listener to send him the hospital footage. He watched it 6 times. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He packed up his equipment and drove the 300 miles to Oregon. If he was right, this story would put his podcast on the map. And if he was wrong, he'd still find out what really happened to his cousin. Because Emily Dawson had disappeared on the same night as Ashley Collins, his younger cousin, victim number 2. Everyone else had stopped looking. Nate never had. In a beige living room on Cedarwood Lane, Sarah Whitaker watched the news in silence. Her daughter Maggie had vanished on the second night, 14 years old. Vanished from her bed. No footprints, no broken locks, no strange vehicles reported. The police called it a runaway, but Sarah had never believed that. Now Emily was back. She gripped her tea so tightly that the mug cracked down the middle. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She picked up her car keys. If Emily remembered anything at all, Sarah needed to hear it, even if it killed her. At exactly 3:17 a.m. that night, Benji Moore sat upright in his bed, gasping. He was 10 years old and rarely slept through the night. His parents thought he had night terrors. Maybe epilepsy. But Benji knew better. He dreamed things he couldn't explain, and tonight he'd seen her. Emily, not how she looked now, how she looked then, trapped in a windowless room, whispering something over and over again: the stairs don't go down, they go under. He didn't know what it meant, but he woke up with a nosebleed and a single thought pounding in his head. It's starting again. Emily Dawson sat up in her hospital bed, eyes scanning the window, as if waiting for something. She hadn't spoken again since the first night. The doctors gave her sedatives. Her parents hovered constantly. The sheriff stopped by once and left with nothing. But when the nurse came to check her vitals at 3 o'clock, the bed was empty. The window was cracked open, and on the wall, written in faint red smears, was a sentence that would later haunt every investigator involved. 7 were taken, but 8 returned. March 4th, 2023, 6:48 a.m. The sun barely cracked the grey Oregon skyline as the hospital descended into panic. Emily Dawson was gone again, but this time she had not vanished into thin air. She had left a message. Dr. Lyle Frank stood frozen outside room 214, his clipboard trembling in one hand. Nurses whispered behind surgical masks, trying to piece together the impossible. The hallway reeked of antiseptic and dread. Sheriff Celia Darnell had seen some strange things in her 10 years on the job, but this one chilled her deeper than most. She read the red smear on the wall a second time, then a third. 7 were taken, but 8 returned. She stared at it for a long moment. lips tightening into a hard line. Then she muttered, "What the hell does that mean?" Deputy Miles stood at her shoulder. "Think someone else came back too. I think we better find out. Fast." 6 hours earlier, the hospital was quiet. At 12:11 a.m., the overnight nurse, Sandra, had just finished her notes on the last check-in for the East Wing. Room 214 had been calm. Emily Dawson hadn't spoken, hadn't moved much, just stared out the window into the dark pines surrounding the hospital grounds. Sandra tapped her pen twice, paused, then closed the chart. At 12:37 IE, security footage caught a figure moving down the hall outside the nurses' station. It wasn't Emily. It was someone else. Someone the camera barely picked up. A blurred outline in a hoodie, moving like smoke along the corridor wall. One hand trailed the surface, fingers leaving no smudges. No one noticed until morning, no alarms triggered. The footage, while chilling, offered no facial features, no entry point, no exit. But when investigators enhanced the audio track, they picked up a faint sound from inside room 214 at precisely 12:41 AE. It was Emily's voice, and she was whispering to someone. Jack's boots hit the gravel parking lot of the Hollow Creek Diner at 7:05 a.m., and the smell of burnt bacon hit him like a memory punch. This was the same spot he'd taken Sarah Whitaker's statement 5 years ago. She'd barely looked up from the photograph of her missing daughter. He ordered black coffee and sat by the window, staring at the rising sun as if it owed him an apology. He wasn't there long before Nate Collins slid into the opposite booth. "How'd I know I'd find you here?" Nate asked, voice smooth but tight. "Old blood finds the same wounds." Jack didn't smile. "Heard you've been chasing ghosts with a mic and a busted Wi-Fi signal. And you've been drinking ghosts in a bottle." The air stiffened. They didn't like each other, never had, but they needed each other now. The disappearance case had just cracked wide open again. "Emily's gone, again," Jack said. Nate blinked. "What?" "Hospital room. Empty. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no trace. Just a message on the wall. Let me guess. Red ink. Creepy sentence. Code nobody can figure out." Jack's eyes locked on Nate's. "Close. She said 8 came back." Nate leaned back slowly, lips parting just enough to breathe 2 words. "Holy hell." Sarah Whitaker sat in her car outside the police station, hands clenched around the steering wheel. Her daughter's face stared back at her from the rear-view mirror in a sun-faded photograph taped there since 2018. She hadn't slept. Emily's return stirred something sharp inside her, hope. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Hope made you believe the impossible. It made you chase illusions. But this was no illusion. She walked into the sheriff's office and demanded to see the message left on the wall. Donald hesitated, then relented. They showed her the security footage, too. She watched Emily whisper to someone unseen, a soft, rhythmic pulse in her voice, almost musical. Then Emily turned her head slightly toward the corner of the room, not the camera, and said something that chilled everyone in the room. The audio specialist rewound it 5 times before they believed what they heard. He was not supposed to be here. He was the first. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Her daughter had drawn a picture the week before she disappeared, a stick figure with black scribbles for a face and the word "first" written above it in big red letters. She had always thought it was a child's imagination. Now she wasn't so sure. Benji Moore sat on the carpet in his bedroom, surrounded by toys he no longer played with. His sketch pad rested on his lap, the tip of his pencil trembling slightly in his small hand. His dream had returned. Same cold room, same stairs, only this time someone else was in the dream. A man with a stitched-up face and no eyes. He moved without sound, stood in corners when Benji looked away. And he said a single sentence. "You let the wrong one out." Benji didn't understand it, but he knew he had to draw. He scribbled the man's face as best as he could, sweat rolling down the side of his cheek. Then he circled something behind the figure. A door, with a hand reaching out from the crack. Another return at 9:17 a.m. Local farmer Greg Holman was tending his chickens when he spotted movement near his barn. He assumed it was a bear until he heard the sobbing. He approached slowly and saw a man barefoot, bruised, wearing clothes a decade out of fashion, slumped against the barn door. His name was David Langford. He'd gone missing in 2008. 15 years ago. No one had seen him since. Sheriff Darnell's decision. By 10 o'clock a.m., the town was on edge. News spread fast. Another returned, and this one was older, feral, speaking gibberish. The hospital took him in, and once again the signs were familiar. Restraints, memory gaps, hallucinations. Sheriff Darnell held a closed-door meeting with her department, Jack, Nate, and Sarah. "I don't know what's happening here," she said, voice low and firm, "but if this is spreading, I need to put this town on lockdown before panic spreads." Jack looked at her dead in the eye. "This isn't new. It never stopped. We just stopped watching." Nate leaned forward. "Emily's message, 7 were taken, 8 came back. That means one of them doesn't belong." Sarah's voice cracked. "Then who is it?" No one answered, because at that moment the power cut out in the sheriff's station, and every phone rang at once. Not just rang, screamed. Loud, sharp feedback blared from each speaker, followed by a static-soaked voice none of them recognized. A whisper layered over broken silence. "You brought it back." The sheriff's station was drenched in silence. Phones lay scattered on desks, some still vibrating with static after the mysterious call. Sheriff Celia Darnell stood in the center of the main room, her knuckles pale against the metal edge of her desk. Her deputies stared at the ceiling as if an answer might crawl down from it. Jack Remy had not moved since the call ended. "You brought it back," he repeated softly, as if trying to squeeze meaning from each syllable. Benji Moore sat on the hallway bench outside the station's interrogation room. His legs swung gently above the floor. His mother stood beside him, arms folded, tense. Inside the room, David Langford lay on a hospital bed that had been rolled into the precinct. The doctors had sedated him after his arrival, but as the medication wore off, his body began to twitch, and his lips formed words that made little sense. Except to Jack. He stepped inside quietly, followed by Nate Collins, who had not stopped recording on his handheld device since the morning. David's eyes blinked open. "Do you know where you are?" Jack asked. David's gaze drifted toward the fluorescent lights above, then toward the mirror in the corner. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. "You're in Crescent Hollow. It's 2023. You've been missing for 15 years. David blinked again. No emotion, no recognition, only a hoarse whisper as he stared past them. "You opened the black stairwell." Jack leaned forward. "What is the black stairwell?" David's hands began to tremble. "The one beneath the white door. It doesn't go down, it goes under the town." Nate froze. Benji said the same thing. Jack turned. "The boy?" "He drew it this morning. A door under the floor, a hand reaching out." David gripped the sheet. "I was there. I saw her, the girl, the runner. She told me not to follow the music." Jack frowned. "Emily?" David didn't answer. Instead, he reached toward Jack's chest and whispered again. "She let it follow her out." At 3:03 p.m., Benji Moore began humming. He had fallen asleep in the back seat of his mother's car while she ran errands at the grocery store. When she returned, she found him pale and sweating. "Are you okay, baby?" He opened his eyes and simply said, "They're in the water now." That night, he drew again. The door from before had changed. Now there were 7 shadows walking away from it. The 8th stood still, watching. Behind the 8th was a second door, smaller, older, and something behind it was scratching to get out. While the town speculated and theories flew across social media, Jack and Nate retraced the last known steps of Emily Dawson. A neighbor's doorbell camera had picked up footage at 3:46 a.m. the night she returned. She had passed the driveway barefoot, staggering slightly. But something was strange. She was not alone. Barely visible in the frame was a second figure, a tall man, thin, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothing. He stayed in the shadows, never revealing his face, but he matched the same figure seen in surveillance footage from the hospital hallway. Nate paused the footage. "Same guy. You see it?" Jack nodded. "We have a stalker. One who doesn't show up on camera properly. That, or..." Nate hesitated. "Something else." Jack rubbed the stubble on his chin. Emily was returned, but not rescued. Something else made the decision. And if 8 came back, like she wrote, then one of them is an intruder. Nate's eyes narrowed. We need to figure out which. The warning Sarah Whitaker received a letter that afternoon. No stamp, no return address, just a folded sheet of lined paper slid under her door. It read, "If you ask the wrong questions, your daughter will stay missing forever." There was no signature, no fingerprint, just a small symbol. At the bottoms, a spiral within a spiral. Sarah dropped the paper as if it had burned her. She dialed Jack immediately. "I think someone's watching the families. They don't want the rest of the truth out." Jack arrived at her house within 30 minutes. As they spoke, Sarah realized something chilling. The handwriting on the letter looked familiar. It looked exactly like her daughter's. At 9:20 p.m., a second return occurred. This time, it was not a person, it was a cassette tape, left on the doorstep of the Crescent Hollow Library, wrapped in butcher paper, labeled simply, "Play me where the light dies." Inside was a short audio recording, static. Then a voice, feminine, calm. "Hello again. This is Emily Dawson. If you're hearing this, then I am gone. Again." Static crackled. "They took us to the understairs. We were never meant to leave, but someone else did. Someone who should not have returned. One of us is a gate now. One of us carries it." Another burst of static. "If you hear the music, do not follow it. And if you see the man with no hands, close your eyes and count to 7. That's all the time you'll get." Then the tape ended. Benji Moore woke up screaming. His drawing had changed again. Now there were 6 figures walking away from the door. The 7th had vanished. The 8th had turned around, and its eyes were open, blood red. He whispered to himself as his mother rushed in, clutching him tightly. The wrong one came back. The wrong one came back. Rain pelted the tin roof of the old Whitaker farmhouse. Inside, the walls felt colder than usual. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at the worn letter with her daughter's handwriting. The spiral, etched at the bottom, pulsed in her mind like a siren she could not silence. She had not slept. Jack Remy sat at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold, staring at the drawings Benji Moore had brought with him earlier that evening. 7 figures, then 8, then 1 gone, then a figure facing the other way. Each sketch was crude, but there was a rhythm in them, a code, maybe even a story. "Do you think Emily made that tape before she left?" Sarah asked softly. Jack nodded. She had time. There's always a lull before the next wave, like the eye of a storm. Sarah placed a hand on the table. "What do we do when the next one disappears?" Jack looked at her. "We stop waiting." The next morning, Nate Collins stood outside the Crescent Hollow Public Library, staring at the dew-covered glass door. In one hand he held the cassette tape, in the other a flashlight. He had not come alone. Benji Moore walked beside him, holding his mother's hand tightly. She was nervous, but Benji had insisted. He said he needed to show them something. They entered together. The library was quiet. Too quiet. No humming computers, no turning pages. Even the air felt thinner. Nate led the way down the carpeted steps to the basement level. There were study rooms, dusty archives, and old book returns. But Benji did not stop. He led them to the far end, a broom closet. He pointed to the floor. "There," he said. "That's where it is." Nate crouched, ran his hand over the floorboards. Just a closet. Until he noticed a hairline crack, he pulled back the old mat. Beneath it was a narrow hatch. He looked up. Sarah whispered, "Should we open it?" Nate exhaled. "We didn't come this far to run." He grabbed the edge and pulled. It creaked. Inside was a stairwell, and the stairs went under. They descended slowly. It was not a long descent, but it felt eternal. The flashlight flickered. The walls were made of stone, not wood, and bore markings, symbols similar to the spiral on Sarah's letter. Older than the house above, older than the town itself. The air was damp, with a metallic scent. Benji said nothing. When they reached the bottom, there was only a single room, square, empty, except for one thing. A red umbrella, leaning against the far wall. Sarah gasped. "That's Maggie's. She used to carry that to school." Nate stepped forward and examined it. The handle was engraved. He read the words aloud. "Return what you took." A sound echoed from above. The hatch slammed shut, and then they were in the dark. The light returned after 12 seconds, as if the darkness had blinked. When it did, something had changed. The room was no longer empty. On the far side stood a mirror, and in the mirror were not their reflections. Nate saw himself with eyes sewn shut. Sarah saw herself holding a child made of ash. Benji saw nothing, just a void. Then the mirror rippled, and a voice whispered from behind them, "You opened it. You brought the silence back." They turned, but no one was there. Then the walls began to shake. Nate shouted, "Move! Up the stairs, now!" They ran, Sarah clutching Benji's hand, Nate close behind. The stairwell groaned, stone dust falling from above. They emerged into the broom closet, gasping, coughing, and slamming the hatch shut behind them. No one spoke for several seconds. Benji finally broke the silence. "It's awake now." At 8:03 p.m., a stranger walked into the Crescent Hollow police station. He was soaking wet, shirt clinging to his thin frame. His eyes were empty, hollow. He spoke a single sentence to the deputy on duty. "I was in the mare room." They rushed him into medical. His name was Greg Lancer. Disappeared in 2011. He had not aged a day. That night, Jack called them all together. As in the past, he had not laid the weapon, nor called out to them to disobey them. That night, Jack called them all together. Sarah, Nate, Benji, Sheriff Darnell, even the town priest, Father Milton, who had officiated 6 of the 7 memorials over the years. They met in the basement of the church. Jack pinned photos to the corkboard, names, dates, vanishing times, return locations. One clear fact emerged. All returns had happened in March, 1 per year, until now. Now 2 had come back within 2 days. Jack pointed to them. "They're not just taking people. They're preparing something," Nate added. And Emily's tape said one of the returned isn't real. "A gate," she said. "Whatever that means." Benji spoke then, very softly. "I know who it is." Everyone turned to him. "The one who can't look at their reflection." Jack narrowed his eyes. "David Langford?" Benji shook his head. "Emily." Jack returned to the hospital that night to examine the surveillance footage again. At 2:46 a.m., the hallway camera outside room 214 caught Emily standing in front of a mirror. She was staring at it, not moving, for almost 5 full minutes. Then, slowly, Her reflection blinked before she did. Jack's blood ran cold. The hallway outside room 214 was quiet again. Too quiet. The security feed showed a single nurse checking vitals around 2:50 a.m., her face calm, unaware of the electronic eye watching from the corner. Then came the moment Jack had seen a dozen times now. Emily Dawson stood before the mirror, her shoulders perfectly still, her feet bare on the linoleum. The nurse had stepped out just before this moment. The lights overhead had flickered once, briefly. Then it happened again. The reflection blinked before she did. Jack paused the feed. He leaned closer to the screen. The reflection's mouth opened slightly. Emily's had not. He stepped back from the monitor, his skin crawling. There was something inhabiting the mirror, and whatever it was pretending to be her. Emily had been moved to a secured medical wing after her reappearance. The hospital cited severe psychological instability as the reason, but that was not the full story. Dr. Lyle Frank, the lead physician overseeing her case, had stopped writing his reports in digital form. He now used a leather-bound notebook that he kept locked in a drawer. On the inside cover, written in his own hand, was a message. "If you read this, and I am not myself, burn the mirror in room 3. His notes had become increasingly strange over the last 24 hours. Phrases repeated themselves. Margins were filled with drawings of spiral symbols. On page 22 he had scribbled, "Emily Dawson's vitals do not match human patterns. Her heartbeat skips every 7th beat. Her temperature drops every hour, then reset. And finally, her reflection does not copy her movements, it leads them." Sarah Whittaker had not slept. She paced her living room, a flashlight in one hand and a photograph of Maggie in the other. In the photograph, Maggie smiled beside their mailbox, holding a red umbrella and a comic book. It was a strange detail to cling to, but Sarah suddenly remembered something. The comic book Maggie had carried the day she vanished was never found. It had been her favorite, something called Starlight Hollow, a fantasy adventure about children falling into another world through a cracked mirror. The spiral symbol had been on the cover. She dropped the photo and picked up her phone. Nate was the one who found it. Using his podcast community, he traced the spiral symbol to a series of local legends from the 1800s. Crescent Hollow had once been known by another name, Providence Gap. According to journals kept in the Regional Historical Archive, several townspeople vanished in 1873, under circumstances almost identical to the recent disappearances. 7 vanished in the spring. 1 came back in early summer. That survivor, a preacher named Eli Grant, returned mute and left behind a warning carved into the wooden beams of the church tower. The door opens both ways, but only one carries the key. The journal's final entry claimed that Eli walked into the woods 2 days later and never returned. Nate clicked the microphone on his recorder. If the spiral symbol is real and connected to the understairs, then we are dealing with something far older than Emily Dawson, something that has rules, and one of those rules is this: it always takes 7. He paused, and it leaves 1 as a seed. Jack visited Dr. Frank later that day. He found the man sitting at his desk, eyes bloodshot, hand trembling. Frank did not greet him. "She doesn't blink like a person," the doctor whispered. Jack leaned in. "What happened last night?" Frank opened the drawer, handed over his notebook. Jack flipped through it, quickly absorbing the unfiltered fear between the pages. He stopped at a sketch of a face, blank eyes, black tears, a mouth too wide. "That's what I saw in the mirror," Frank said. "Not her reflection, the thing behind it." Jack looked at him. "Have you spoken to her?" "No. She won't talk. But her eyes, they move like something is watching from the inside." Then Frank handed him a security badge. "It's for the old psych ward wing. They closed it 5 years ago, but yesterday I found her standing outside its entrance. Jack raised an eyebrow. She said she was waiting for it to unlock. The old psychiatric wing had not been touched in years. Dust coated the floor, and mold had begun to creep along the ceilings. Jack's flashlight barely pierced the gloom. He passed broken gurneys, torn straitjackets, shattered glass. At the end of the hall, a single door stood ajar. Its metal frame was warped slightly, as though something had pressed against it from within. Jack pushed it open. Inside was a mirror, and nothing else. But the glass was wrong. It rippled faintly, like a disturbed pond. Jack stepped forward and saw himself. Then he saw movement. His reflection smiled. Jack had not. Benji Moore began to cough uncontrollably around the same time Jack stepped into the mirror room. At home, his mother rushed to his side, wiping his forehead. He whispered something through the coughing fit. "Don't let him go near it. It's not done with him." She asked who he meant. Benji looked up, his voice hoarse. "The detective." Jack stared into the mirror as the surface began to shimmer. Then he heard it, a soft melody. It was the same tune that had played on the cassette tape, Emily's voice humming faintly. It grew louder, and then he heard something behind it, a second voice, deeper, wet, like it was echoing through water. "You are not supposed to be here." Jack's hand began to tremble. He stepped back, breathing hard. The surface of the mirror flashed once. For a second, he saw not a reflection, but a room filled with others. People. Faces pressed to the glass, eyes pleading. They were the missing. And behind them something moved. Towering, limbs too long, no face. Then it was gone. That evening, Emily Dawson spoke for the first time since her second disappearance. Dr. Frank was not in the room. A nurse had come to check her vitals. As the machine beeped quietly, Emily turned to the nurse and whispered, "I remember the understairs now." The nurse froze. "Emily showed me what they want, who they want." Emily turned her head, eyes unfocused. "He's getting too close." The nurse swallowed. "Who is?" Emily smiled, "The one who walked backward through the mirror." The wind howled through the gaps in the siding of St. Agnes Medical as if the entire building was breathing. Inside room 314, Emily Dawson sat upright in her bed, staring at the wall opposite her. Her face was blank, pale, unblinking. A nurse stood nearby, holding a tray of medication. "You said you remembered something," she said gently, hoping to coax more from her. Emily turned to her slowly, lips parting just enough to speak. "He has crossed over." He was not supposed to. The nurse's spine stiffened. "Who are you talking about?" Emily tilted her head. "The detective." Jack had not told anyone what he saw inside the mirror room. Not yet. He needed confirmation. Proof. Something he could put in a report. Something that would not get him committed. He left the hospital just after 3 in the morning, not realizing the reflection in the hallway glass followed him just a second too late. That night he slept in a roadside motel. It was a run-down place with stained curtains and flickering lights. Room 6. The clerk had handed him the key with a warning. "Stay off the mirrors after midnight. They buzz." Jack thought it was a joke until he heard it. At 3:14 a.m., the bathroom mirror began to hum. A low electric buzz, almost like static, behind a voice that was just out of reach. He approached, hesitant, heart hammering in his chest. And then, once again, it blinked before he did. But this time, something left the glass. At that same hour, Benji Moore woke up screaming. His mother rushed in, finding him curled on the floor, clutching a sketchbook to his chest. He handed it to her, tears running down his face. The drawing was different. No longer stairs, no longer doors. Now it was a hand. It looked like Jack's. But something had been carved into the palm. A spiral. The skin around it was cracked and blackened as if burned from the inside out. Beneath the drawing, Benji had written one line. He touched the other side. It touched back. By morning, Jack felt it. A stinging in his palm. At first he thought he had cut himself, but there was no wound, just a dull heat, an irritation that pulsed every few seconds. He walked to the mirror in his motel room, raised his hand. His reflection was slower now, a beat behind. He stared at it. The reflection smiled. Jack did not. He slammed a towel over the glass and backed away. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah Whittaker. "We need to meet. Now." That afternoon, Jack, Sarah, Nate and Father Milton met in the basement of the old community hall. Benji sat nearby, flipping through his sketchpad in silence. Jack opened with no pleasantries. "I went into the mirror room. I saw the others. They're alive. They're trapped." Sarah leaned forward. "How do you know they're not just shadows?" "I saw Maggie. She looked right at me. She put her hand to the glass." Sarah's hand trembled. Nate pulled out the old journal he had found from 1873. He flipped to the final page. Ellie Grant said the mirror room was a gate, a doorway to something beneath reality. He wrote that, "Once the mirror smiles, it chooses its host." Jack looked at his palm. The heat was now a slow burn. He had not told them yet about the mark. Benji stood suddenly, staring at the old rotary phone in the corner of the room. "It's going to ring." Everyone turned to him. "Benji," Sarah whispered. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, the phone rang. No one moved. It rang again. Jack reached for it. He answered. Silence on the other end. Then a voice. A child's whisper. "You saw the room, now the room sees you." The line went dead. Back at the hospital, Dr. Frank stood outside Emily Dawson's room, staring at the vitals on the screen. Her pulse had stabilized. Her temperature was perfectly normal, but the girl inside was not Emily. She sat cross-legged on the bed now, humming a soft lullaby, one that had no lyrics, one that had no beginning or end. The nurse, who entered 5 minutes later, dropped her tray and ran out screaming, because Emily had turned toward her and the reflection in the window had not. Later that evening, Father Milton asked to speak to Jack alone. They sat near the fireplace in the church's old reading room. The priest's hands were shaking slightly. "I've seen this before," he said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "People, not this exact thing, but something close. When I was a boy, there was a house in Cold Creek. It had mirrors that showed people before they entered the room, people who hadn't even arrived yet." He leaned forward. "They took my sister. My parents said she ran away, but I saw her reflection walk off without her." Jack frowned. "The mirror took her? I don't know. All I know is this. Reflections are not copies. They are echoes. Sometimes what echoes back is louder than the original. By midnight." Jack could not hide it any longer. The mark had appeared, burned into his palm, a perfect spiral, red and raw. It throbbed with every heartbeat. Sarah saw it first. Her voice cracked. "That's what was on Maggie's drawing." Nate stood. "Jack?" "That's the gate." Jack nodded, lips tight. "It chose me." Benji looked up from his sketchpad. His voice was quiet, afraid. "If it marked you, then it wants you to open it." Jack stood. "Then let's give it what it wants." The air inside the old church had thickened, like the walls themselves were breathing. A storm pressed against the stained glass windows, rattling them with every gust. Rain drummed a rhythm that felt too intentional to be natural. Jack stood in the center of the nave, palm open, the spiral mark glowing faintly beneath the flickering candles. Benji sat quietly in the front pew, clutching his sketchpad. Father Milton held a cross so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Sarah, Nate, and Dr. Frank stood behind Jack, each watching with dread, as he stepped toward the old mirror they had retrieved from the hospital's sealed psych ward. It stood now like a door, waiting to be acknowledged. Jack raised his hand. The reflection moved in sync, this time, until he touched the glass. It rippled beneath his fingertips. Nate whispered, "What if it's a trap?" Jack gave a grim smile. "It already is." When Jack stepped forward, the glass welcomed him. There was no cracking, no sound of breaking, just a sudden pull, as if gravity itself had tilted sideways. His vision stretched, bent, then snapped into focus. He stood in a long corridor, stone walls, no windows, no doors, only mirrors lining both sides. But the reflections in them were not his. They were other people. Some were screaming, some were silent, some were watching him, and some were watching something behind him. Jack turned around slowly. Nothing there. Not yet. He walked forward, boots scraping across the cold stone floor. As he passed the mirrors, the lights dimmed. Whispers echoed in the silence. "You should not be here. You are not the first. You are marked now." He stopped in front of one mirror that glowed faintly. Inside, he saw her. Maggie Whitaker, 14. The same age she had been when she vanished. Her eyes were wide. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Jack reached out. "Maggie?" Her mouth moved, forming two words. "Not him." Then the reflection shattered from the inside. In the church, the mirror's surface clouded over. Benji jumped from his seat. He found her. He whispered. Sarah ran to the mirror, pressing her hands to the glass. "Is she all right? Did he see her?" Benji's eyes filled with tears. "She saw him. But she's not alone in there." Father Milton whispered a prayer, his voice barely audible over the pounding storm. The mirror pulsed once. A ripple of light ran across its surface, and then Jack's scream echoed through the room. Inside the corridor, Jack staggered backward. His left arm burned. The mark on his palm flared bright red. From the shadows ahead, something stepped forward. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but its proportions were wrong. Its arms were too long, its face too flat. No eyes, no nose, only a wide mouth stitched tightly closed with black thread. It raised its hand and pointed at Jack. Then it opened its mouth, tearing the stitches apart. The sound that came out was not a voice. It was all voices. Emily's, Maggie's, David's, Henry Caldwell's, all speaking at once. "She let us in. One of us is not one of you." Jack staggered. The sound bored into his skull like an ice pick. He dropped to one knee. Behind the creature, more figures appeared, dozens, each missing person, pale, still, hollow-eyed. They stood like statues, and yet Jack could feel their desperation. They were trying to hold the thing back, not protect it, contain it. One of them, Henry Caldwell, stepped forward and whispered a single phrase. "Find the mirror that never reflects." That is where the breach began. Then the floor beneath Jack cracked open. Jack fell through the darkness. The screams of the missing growing fainter. He landed hard on cold stone. This room was different, circular, ancient. The walls curved into a dome, symbols carved into every inch, and at the center, a mirror without a reflection. Jack stared at it. He could see the room around him, his feet, his hands, but not his face. His voice was shaky. "This is the source." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver coin. He had kept it for years. It had belonged to the first missing person he ever investigated, his sister. He placed it at the base of the mirror. The moment he did, the air changed. The mirror cracked slightly. A voice behind him whispered, "You opened it again." Back in the hospital, Emily Dawson rose from her bed. The monitors flatlined, but she was breathing. The nurse on duty saw her step into the hallway. eyes glassy, walking barefoot across the cold tile. "Emily?" the nurse asked. Emily turned and smiled, then vanished. No doors opened, no lights flickered. She was simply gone. Back at the church, Jack stumbled out of the mirror, collapsing to the floor. Sarah and Nate rushed to his side. He was shaking, covered in dust and sweat. He looked up at Benji. "I found Maggie." Sarah gasped. "She's alive?" Jack hesitated. "She's trapped, but she's fighting. They all are. They're trying to stop something." Nate helped him sit up. "What did you see in the center? What is it?" Jack looked down at his palm. The spiral was no longer just a mark. It had grown. Now it covered his entire hand. They call it the echo. Silence no longer meant safety in Crescent Hollow. The quiet was thicker now, like the town was holding its breath. The fog that had rolled in the night before still hovered low, swallowing sound and distorting light. Inside the church basement, Jack Remy sat at the long wooden table, his right hand wrapped in gauze. The spiral had stopped burning, but it had not faded. Instead, it pulsed faintly beneath the bandage, like a second heartbeat. It was growing more detailed. Now it had lines radiating outward like a map. Nate paced the room, clutching the historical journal he had retrieved from the archives. The final passage still echoed in his mind. "The mirror that never reflects is not broken. It is the only one telling the truth." Sarah stood by the window, holding one of Maggie's childhood drawings. In it, a girl stood beneath a crooked tree. The moon above was split down the middle. Maggie had written one word in shaky letters at the bottom: Echo. Jack knew where the mirror was. He had seen it in his vision during the fall. The room had been circular, ancient, marked with the spiral. He had felt its pull, but the location remained unclear. Benji sat nearby, flipping through his sketchbook. Then he stopped. He pulled a page free and handed it to Jack. "This is the place." The drawing showed the mirror at the center of a stone circle, surrounded by jagged hills and pine trees. A path led down beneath a mountain. Carved above the entrance were the same spirals Jack had seen in the understairs. Sarah leaned in. "That's Red Hollow Cavern. Nobody goes there anymore." Nate nodded slowly. "It collapsed a decade ago. At least, that's what they told everyone." Jack stood. "Then that's where we're going." By sunrise, Sheriff Celia Darnell had heard about Emily's second disappearance. She did not believe in coincidences anymore. She visited the church before noon, demanding answers. Jack told her what he had seen. The understairs, the trapped, the echo. She listened, arms crossed, jaw tight. Then she surprised everyone. "I believe you." Late raised his eyebrows. "Just like that?" Celia turned to him. "My brother disappeared in 2003. The case was ruled a suicide, but we never found a body. 3 weeks after he vanished, I found a mirror in our basement. It showed him standing behind me, crying." She looked at Jack. "Take me with you." Red Hollow Cavern was 10 miles east of town. Overgrown trails led up to the sealed entrance. Old signs warned of unstable rock, but Jack could feel the spirals pull before they even reached the stone archway. The metal gate had long since rusted away. Inside, the cavern descended quickly into darkness. Stale air pushed out at them, thick with dust and something older. Benji stayed behind with Father Milton at the entrance. Jack, Nate, Sarah and Sheriff Darnell carried lanterns and walked carefully, deeper and deeper. They passed jagged rock formations and ancient carvings. Then, after nearly 20 minutes, they found it, a circular chamber, and in the center the mirror. It was tall, taller than any they had seen so far. Its frame was carved with dozens of spirals, each slightly different. The glass surface was polished, but showed no image, not even shadows. Sarah stepped forward. "That's not a mirror," Nate whispered. "It's a door pretending to be a wall." Jack approached, unwrapped his hand and held it toward the glass. Nothing, then a ripple, and then a whisper. The gate is not opened, it is remembered. Suddenly the chamber grew colder. Breath turned to fog. Jack stepped back as the glass shifted. A figure stood on the other side now. It was Emily, but not the Emily they knew. This version was pale, her eyes fully black, her mouth slightly open, her hands pressed to the inside of the glass, leaving faint smears. Sarah whispered, "What is she doing?" The reflection began to speak, but her mouth did not move. Instead, the sound came from inside their heads. "One of you must stay. One of you must replace the missing." The mirror flared once with light, and then it was gone. The chamber dimmed. Emily's image faded. The glass returned to stillness. But they all heard the last part. "If you do not give us one, we will take two." They returned to the surface in silence. Benji was waiting, shivering. "I saw it," he said quietly. "She was here. Emily was watching." Father Milton looked toward the trees. "Something followed you back." Jack turned to Sarah and Nate. "We have to decide. Do we send someone in to keep the balance, or do we risk losing two more?" Sarah stared at him. "And who decides that?" Jack looked at his hand. "I was marked. It should be me." Nate shook his head. "You're the only one who's been inside and come back. You know too much." Celia spoke next. "Then maybe it's me. I've been waiting for an answer for 20 years. They argued. No one agreed. Then Benji said something that stopped them all. "It's not about choice. It's about invitation." They turned to him. He held up another drawing. This one showed someone being pulled into the mirror by dozens of hands. That person was Nate. That night, Nate returned to his home alone. He stared into the bathroom mirror for a long time. It reflected him, but he could feel it waiting. He placed a hand on the surface. It was cold, then warm, then it pulled. The mirror went black, and Nate Collins was gone. The town slept in uneasy silence. In a small house on Pineview Road, a mother tossed in her bed, waking to the sound of her child murmuring the names of the vanished. In the church, Father Milton lit every candle he had, whispering prayers older than Scripture. And in the woods beyond Red Hollow Cavern, something watched. The mirror had taken Nate, and the cycle was not over. Nate Collins opened his eyes. He was lying on a surface that felt like glass but gave slightly beneath his hands. The world around him was colourless, painted in dull greys and endless shadows. The sky had no stars, only a ceiling of swirling ash. He stood slowly. Reflections moved around him, not his own, others, people. They walked in a slow circle, eyes vacant, mouths open, but silent. Trapped in motion, locked in time. He recognized them. Emily, Henry Caldwell, David Langford, and Maggie Whittaker. They did not see him, or if they did they showed no sign. Then a voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere. "You were not chosen, but you were given." Nate spun. A figure stepped forward. It had no face, only a polished surface, like a mirror where a face should have been. The voice came again. "You entered by invitation. Now you must open the gate from inside." Nate's heart pounded. "What happens if I don't?" The figure stepped closer. "Then the cycle resets, and two more will be taken, until the balance is restored." Nate clenched his fists. "Then let me speak to them. Let me tell them what you are." The figure tilted its head. "They already know, but knowing is not the same as accepting." Back in Crescent Hollow, Jack gathered everyone for one final meeting. Sarah, Sheriff Darnell, Dr. Frank, Father Milton, and Benji. The boy had drawn another picture. It showed a circle of people holding hands around the reflectionless mirror. Light poured from it. One figure stood inside the mirror, their face blurred. Jack understood. It's not just a gate. It's a cage, and it can be sealed from both sides. Sarah leaned forward. Then we need someone on the inside and someone on the outside to close it. Jack nodded. I think Nate is already inside. If we can find the right mirror, the original mirror, we can close it together. Father Milton whispered, It will take blood. Dr. Frank added, And it may take more than that. They returned to Red Hollow Cavern. The mirror still stood in the center of the circular chamber, lifeless and cold. Jack stepped forward, hand unwrapped. The spiral now covered his entire forearm, glowing faintly. Benji approached with a small object in his hand, a shard, a fragment of the broken mirror from the hospital. He handed it to Jack. You need both pieces, the gate and the key. Jack nodded. He pressed the shard against the surface. The mirror shimmered. Inside, they saw Nate. He stood still, arms at his sides, face calm. Jack called out, Nate, can you hear me? Nate looked up. I'm ready. The air thickened. The chamber darkened. Jack placed both hands on the mirror. Blood ran from the spiral down his arm. Nate reached out from the other side. Their hands met on the surface. A sound cracked through the chamber. Like glass breaking in reverse, the mirror blazed with white light. Screams echoed. Not human screams, the kind that came from deep within the earth. Figures rushed the edge of the mirror from the inside, shadows, beings without form, but they were held back by the circle, by the ones who had been taken. Henry, Emily, Maggie, all of them stood at the boundary, holding the darkness in place. Nate's voice rang clear. Now. Jack drove the shard into the center of the spiral on his arm. Blood sprayed. The mirror shook, then collapsed inward. The light vanished. The chamber fell silent. Jack fell to the floor. March 12, 2023. Crescent Hollow woke to calm skies. No fog, no whispers, no vanishings. Dr. Frank resigned the next morning and left town without a word. Sheriff Darnell closed the cold cases once marked unsolvable. Benji stopped drawing spirals. Sarah Whitaker visited a quiet meadow outside town. She placed a single red umbrella at the base of a crooked tree and whispered, "Thank you." Jack Remy disappeared that night. No one saw him go. His motel room was empty, his mirror covered with a sheet. Only one thing was left behind, a sketch, drawn in pencil, left on the bed. It showed the circle of missing people, all of them, including Jack, and in the center, Nate Collins, smiling. After 1 year, a new family moved into a small house on the edge of Crescent Hollow. Their young daughter played in the hallway while her parents unpacked boxes. She stopped suddenly at the mirror near the bathroom, pressed her hand to it, and whispered, "Hello." The reflection whispered back, "Welcome home." If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Storiosity, and share your favorite moment from the story in the comments below.